So now that we've got our license manager library, let's go ahead and add the license managing check to our application. Now, just to let you know, some of the steps here we're not really going to be able to do because it's going to require a Google account and you have to pay a $25 fee to create a new one for the Google market. But you'll be able to create your own account and I'll explain to you when we get to those sections. So the first thing that we need to do is go into our Android manifest.xml and we'll need to create a permission for the license manager. So we're just going to add a line here, uses permission, Android name, and then we'll put in com.android.vending.checkLicense. And this gives our application, or causes our application to request the permission to be able to use the license checker to check our license. Okay, so now that we have that done, the next thing that we're going to need to do is to create a callback inside of our main activity here in order to be able to respond to the license manager when it tells us if our license is valid or not. So in order to do that, I'm just going to go down here and we're using our existing application, and I will go ahead and add a class at the bottom here. And this class is basically going to implement an interface, which will be the license checker callback. So let's go ahead and create our new class. We'll do a private class and we'll call this license checker callback impl, because it's an implementation, and it implements license checker callback. And then we'll provide the override for the methods that are required here. So we add the unimplemented methods for this interface. We have allow, don't allow, and application error. Allow will be called by the license manager when we have a successful license check, don't allow when we don't have a successful one, and application error when there's an error code that the license manager gives us. We're not going to worry about this one for now, but you can look up the list of error codes on the developer.android.com site. So what we're going to do for allow here is we're just going to want to just display a toast message. So the first thing we'll do is we just want to make sure that the application isn't already, this activity isn't exiting. If it is, then we're just going to return. And then if it's not, then we're going to create a method that's going to allow us to display a message. Now remember before we had talked about how from another thread we can't just mess with the UI thread. We can't add a message or do something. So we have the same problem here. For example, if I were to just put toast in here, it's not going to work because it's going to try and do something to the UI thread. So if you remember before, we used the handler object to do this. In fact, we still have this handler class inside here. We're going to use the handler again, but we're going to need to create some method to display a message. So I'm just going to create a method here. We're just going to have a message called show message, and we're going to say license check okay, and then we'll do the same thing. We'll do a false or don't allow here. We're going to do the same thing, except we'll say license check failed. So now I need to provide an implementation for this show message, and I'm going to create this method right here. Actually, we want to create it at not inside this class. We're going to create it inside of our main activity class, and we'll take in a string, and then we'll call that string message. And then what we'll do here is we will actually give this to the handler and tell the handler what to do. So the way that we can do that is we can go ahead and we can call our handler that remember we already created, and we'll call a post method on this, and we can pass in a runnable. Now, when we had worked with the dialog, we had posted a message to the handler. We did a send message. In this case, we're going to post something that implements runnable. So it lets us execute some arbitrary code on the UI thread. And all we have to do is just implement this run method. And inside this run method, we can do our toast. So we can do toast dot make text, and we'll use our main activity dot this as the context, and then the character sequence would just be the message, and then we'll just make the duration 5 here. And then of course we need to make message final in order to use it here, because we're doing it inside of this runnable class, so we can't have it changing. So that'll actually, whenever we call show message now, we're going to the handler post this runnable, and it's going to do this toast make text, and then we got to show this. So that'll take care of that part of it. And we're going to want to do something to our handler here. We had our handler doing this handle message and then this dialog dismiss. I'm just going to go ahead and comment this out because we don't want it to always respond in that way. And we don't actually care about the handle message right now. So now we need to declare some variables that we're going to use to hold the license manager and the implementation of the license manager. So let's create a private variable here, and this will be our callback. So it's of type license checker callback, and we'll just call it license checker callback. And then we'll create another type of license checker, and we'll just call this license checker. And we'll need to import that license checker. So this one is going to be the actual checker. This is going to be our callback, which we've created an implementation of this callback. And then we just need to set this up inside of our onCreate method. So what we'll do here is we'll set our license checker callback equal to, and then we can new up our license checker callback implementation. And then we need to set our checker, or our license checker, and we'll tell it to use that callback. So we'll do a new license checker. And the first thing we need to provide is the context. So I'm going to do get application context. Normally I just do activity context, but this really is happening at the application level, the license checking. So it's good to use the application context here in case Android operating system is relying on us being in that context. Then we provide a policy here. And we could implement our own policy, but it's recommended by Android that we use the server managed policy. There's also a strict policy that they implement for us. We don't really have the time in this module to go into the details of that, but most of the time you're just going to use the server managed policy. So I'm going to select server managed policy here. And then again, this is going to take a context. So we're going to go ahead and use our get application context. And then the next thing it's going to take is an obfuscator, and we're provided an obfuscator implementation here also, so we can do a new AES obfuscator. And this obfuscator takes in a salt, application ID, and then a device ID. And we're not going to have all the details of this yet, so I'm just going to put in here, we know we're going to create a constant for the salt. The application ID is actually, we can just call get package name, and that will give us the application ID. And then the device ID, we're going to need to get that before this call. So I'm going to leave that for now. And then the final param that belonged to this license checker is this key. And this encoded public key is the encoded public key that we're going to be given on our Google account if you've created a market account. So I'm just going to call this Google Key, and we'll know that we need to implement that. I'll format this so we can see it here. So we've got a few things that aren't implemented here, but the basic idea here is that we have this license checker callback implementation. We have a license checker, and this license checker is set up to use this server managed policy. Okay, so now let's go ahead and implement this salt. Because we need this salt. So let's create our constant for salt. Okay, so now we've got salt here. That's great for us. And I'm actually going to use a salt that I've already generated here. It doesn't really matter what you have here. It's just a bunch of bytes here, 20 bytes that are going to be used as the salt for the encryption algorithm. So I've got that in. So now the next thing we need is the device ID. So we're going to need to get the device ID. So we'll just put the call to get the device ID right here, and it's a string. So we'll declare this device ID, and we're going to use secure dot get string, and then we'll do this dot get content resolver, and then we're going to pass in secure dot Android ID. And this is basically just going to get the device ID of the Google account that's logged into this device. And so that we can use this in order to create our encryption algorithm for what the server's managed policy needs to use this in order to encrypt inside of a setting the license validity or what is the license validity when it gets it from the server. So now we have this device ID. The only thing that's left is our Google key. And this is one that we're not really going to be able to generate without having a market account for this, and we have to sign up for that. So I'll go ahead and create this here, but it's not going to be a real Google key in this case. So your Google key is going to be something here. We'll just put ABC for now. Okay. So then once you've got this set up, you're almost there. All that we have left to do is to just call this check. And I'm going to make it so that when we click our button here, we've been reusing this button, this is really the enter button, that we're going to do a check. So we have our license checker, and then we can call check access, and we provide the callback, and we have a license checker callback. And so what's going to happen here now is when we click on that button, it's going to check the access, and we're providing this callback. So then that's going to go out and make that access check. And we've already set up this license checker we've told it use the server managed policy. We've given it some information to be able to use that, and the Google key for our particular account. So it'll use that information and make that check on the license server. And then when it comes back, it'll use this callback that we've provided, and it'll give us either an allow or don't allow or an application error. If it comes back with allow or don't allow, it's going to call this show message, and this show message is going to post to our handler, which is our UI thread, a toast. That's going to show this. And I'll go ahead and run this in the emulator, and we're just going to get license check failed because it's not going to be able to use that Google API key. And actually, before I run this, I just realized that we are really going to need a real Google API key here, or at least something that will be the right length. So I'm going to provide a key here that I have just so that we can launch the app. So let's go ahead and run this now. And our application is coming up. And you would put your own API key here once you register. And I'll click this enter. And we see license check failed. So we know that we're at least hitting the license manager. We've got everything implemented here. Just to review real quickly on what we did here. First thing we did is we created this license checker callback implementation so that we could handle the messages that the license checker gives us back. And we just implemented this callback. And we have allow and don't allow. Second thing we did was we created this show message that will just allow us to send a message to UI thread. And we could have done something else here. We could have disabled buttons, enabled buttons, shown a dialog, anything here that you might want to do in response to a fail or a accepted license check. Then what we did was we just created a couple of private variables here to hold the callback and the checker, and then we initialized them here. We created our license checker callback is the one that we implemented, and then we created a new license checker, and we used the server manage policy, and we needed a few things here for the encryption, like the salt, which we just created a salt here. We needed the device ID, which we grabbed here. And then we need our Google key, which we didn't really have, but we put one in so that it'll be able to make that call. And then finally, we just set up the click to check the access. And normally you would probably just put this right in your onCreate. So as soon as the application is launched, it will check the license. And that's really all there is to it. You just have to make sure you have a Google Market account. And I'll show you how to do that actually in the next step when we go to deployment. We'll look at the Google Market account on my account. And once you have this set up, you can go into your account and you can set the response so you can choose different responses for your license manager check to return based on your Google API key. So you can try out a failed response or a successful response or various error codes. So that's really all there is to the license checker. It's a little bit complicated to get it working, but if you follow these steps, you should be there. And you really only have to go through this once to set up your app. And then, if you wanted to move your app to a different site where you want to disable this license checker, basically you just disable this one line of code and then it's not going to check the license, but you can still have all that other code in there. It's not going to hurt anything, which also is a good reason to use the code obfuscator, because if you look at that, if I grab your application and I decompile it, if I find this one place where you're calling this license checker check access and I comment that out and recompile it, I just circumvented your security. So anyway, let's go ahead and move on to actually deploying our application in the market.